Okay, now, before we proceed in the discussion of quantitative research, let us first discuss in detail, with example, the research processes, also known as the scientific method. Okay? Now, we will have a concrete discussion of the research processes. Okay? We all know that research is a systematic and organized way of finding answers to questions. It is systematic because it has a definite set of procedures to be followed. And that this definite set of procedures to be followed is organized in a manner that it is sequential. It has a sequence. And that sequence, okay, in research is known as the research process or the scientific method. And it involves 8 steps. Okay, it involves 8 steps. Number 1 is identifying the research problem. Number 2 is gathering basic information and preliminary data. Number 3 is formulating hypothesis. Number 4, preparing a research design. Number 5, gathering data. So it is different from gathering basic information and preliminary data. Okay? Because in gathering data, these are the statistical data, while gathering basic information is the knowledge. So the sources of knowledge. So number 6, we have organizing and interpreting data. Number 7, drawing conclusions from the interpreted data. And number 8, giving recommendations. So in order to discuss in detail this research process, let us have this example experiment. Okay? So let us continue the discussion with this example experiment. So let's say that in a certain barangay, its people experience the following symptoms. So most of the people residing in this certain barangay experience the following symptoms: headaches, diarrhea, and extreme to mild fever. Now, these symptoms are actually symptoms of typhoid fever. Typhoid fever. Okay? And typhoid fever is actually a waterborne disease. When we say waterborne disease, okay, these are diseases that came from the consumption of water. Okay? And typhoid fever is actually caused by a bacteria. And that bacteria is Salmonella typhi. Salmonella typhi. Okay, so in writing scientific names in handwritten format, you underline it. Okay? But if it is computerized, you italicize it. So, okay? So, in connection, typhoid fever is caused by a bacteria known as Salmonella typhi. Okay, Salmonella typhi. So, using this problem, how can we apply the research process? So, what is the step number 1 in the research process? So, the step number 1 is identifying the research problem. Identifying the research problem. So, in this case scenario, the research problem is the existence of typhoid fever. But the existence of typhoid fever will not be possible without the knowledge where it came from. Okay? So why is there an existence of typhoid fever? So using our knowledge, we found out that typhoid fever is a waterborne disease. So let's say in that certain barangay, they use water obtained from the deep well. Okay, obtained from the deep well. So there can be an inference, or there would be an inference that the typhoid fever emerged upon the consumption of water coming from the or obtained from the deep well. So that is the main identification of the research problem. There is an existence of typhoid fever because of the consumption of water obtained from the deep well. Okay? So, using this diagram or using this preliminary example, we are now ready to gather basic information and preliminary data based from the research problem. Okay? So, let us continue on another sheet of paper. So, on top of that, after identifying the problem, which is the existence of typhoid fever due to the fact that the residents of the barangay consume water from the deep well, we are now ready to proceed to step number 2, which is to gather basic information and preliminary data. Okay? So, in gathering basic information and preliminary data, you must obtain knowledge. This is the process where obtain knowledge. And that knowledge came from reading books, okay, or literatures. Or it can be also obtained through conducting an interview. Okay. So, in gathering basic information and preliminary data, there would be a question. Okay, there would be a question. How to kill the bacteria? And what is that bacteria again? That bacteria is, we are pertaining to the Salmonella typhi or S. typhi. Okay, Salmonella typhi. Now, in gathering basic information of our preliminary data, we must read books, literatures, or conduct an interview. And we must have the research question, which is how to kill the bacteria causing the typhoid fever. Now, let's say that you are the researcher and you read books and literatures on how to kill the bacteria, and you discovered that alkaloids. So, alkaloid is a chemical component that can be found in various species of plants. So, an example of alkaloid is nicotine, found in cigarettes. Nicotine. Okay? So, you found out or you discovered that alkaloid can kill this bacteria or can eradicate Salmonella typhi. And you also discovered that this alkaloid, okay, is present or can be found in a certain species of plant. And that certain of species of plant is eagle fern. Okay? So, eagle fern with a scientific name of Pteridinium. So, Pteridinium aquilinum. Okay. So, in gathering basic information of data, you found out that alkaloid can kill the Salmonella typhi, which is the main cause of the problem. Now, this alkaloid, you found out that this alkaloid can be found in a certain species of plant known as the eagle fern. So, using this basic information and preliminary data, you can now generate or we can now proceed to the third step of research process, which is now formulation of hypothesis. You can now generate or formulate hypothesis. Formulate hypothesis. Okay? So, hypothesis is the tentative solution to the problem. Okay, tentative solution, meaning to say it must be tested first. Okay, tentative. So, what is your hypothesis? Okay, what is your hypothesis in this situation? So, we can hypothesize that eagle fern can kill or can eradicate Salmonella typhi. Okay? So that will be our hypothesis. Okay? Now, using this basic information, preliminary data, and hypothesis, what do you think is the fourth? Okay? Or what do you think is the next step in the research process before we prepare a research design? Obviously, when we have already the hypothesis, we can now infer or we can now create a research title. Research title using the preliminary data and hypothesis. Okay? So, let's say that the independent variable that can be used in our study is the eagle fern because it can kill the Salmonella typhi. Now, this Salmonella typhi is the existence of Salmonella typhi would be our dependent variable. Okay? And let's say, the attenuation goal. Okay, when we say attenuation goal, how will you apply the eagle fern or the independent variable? Let's say the attenuation goal is utilization as an antibacterial agent. The antibacterial agent is the product to be created. So, in creating research title, we must identify the following: the IV, the DV, the attenuation goal, the product to be created, and the problem, of course. So, our independent variable is the eagle fern. Eagle fern with a scientific name of, okay, let us have a correction. I was wrong earlier. It is Pteridium. Pteridium aquilinum, not Pteridinium. Okay, Pteridium aquilinum. Aquilinum. So, that is the independent variable. Now, the dependent variable would be the Salmonella typhi bacteria. Salmonella typhi. So, let's underline that. The attenuation goal is to utilize, okay, utilization is to utilize the independent variable. And then, let's say that the product to be created should be an antibacterial agent. Antibacterial agent. Now, the main problem is that the existence of typhoid fever. Typhoid fever. So, using this components of the research title, we can infer or we can create now a research title, and that is, okay, the utilization of eagle fern with a scientific name of Pteridium aquilinum. Okay, extract, because to obtain the alkaloid you must have the extract. Okay, as an antibacterial agent against Salmonella typhi that causes typhoid fever. So, meaning to say, when we have, okay, the gathering of basic information and preliminary data, and when we have already the hypothesis, we can now create a research title. So, what is the formula in creating a research title? So, the formula would be problem, identifying the problem, plus RRL, or review of related literature and studies, plus the internet. Okay? Plus the hypothesis. We can create a research title. Okay? So that is the main essence or the main significance of identifying the problem, gathering basic information, and formulating hypothesis. Now, in continuing to discuss, or in continuation in the discussion of hypothesis, there are actually classifications of hypothesis. Okay? There are classifications of hypothesis. We have research hypothesis and statistical hypothesis. Research hypothesis provides, the main definition of research hypothesis is that it provides tentative solution to an existing problem. So, we are just identifying possible solutions to an existing problem in research hypothesis. While in statistical hypothesis, we have two. Okay, we have two classifications, and that is null hypothesis, which is H sub 0, where 0 is italicized, and we have alternative hypothesis. Which is H sub I. Okay. So, still using our example, in conducting null hypothesis, we discussed earlier in our previous videos that null hypothesis has a format of there is no significant difference between the independent variable and the use of the commercial product. When we say commercial product, it is a brand that is widely known to let's say to kill a certain bacteria or to serve its purpose. Okay? So meaning to say, in null hypothesis, we can say that there is no significant difference between eagle fern, which is our independent variable, and the commercial product. There is no significant difference between the two. So meaning to say, they are equal. That is the main essence of null hypothesis. However, in alternative hypothesis, there are three more classifications. Okay, there are three more classifications. So number one, we have this example. So in alternative hypothesis, we can say that there is a significant difference. So in null hypothesis, there is no significant difference, so that the IV and the commercial product is equal. However, in a classification of alternative hypothesis, we can say that there is a significant difference, meaning to say eagle fern is not equal to the commercial antibacterial product or the commercial product. Okay, the eagle fern is not equal to the commercial product because there is a significant difference. And an alternative hypothesis which states that there is a significant difference will be known as non-directional alternative hypothesis. Alternative hypothesis. So, in non-directional alternative hypothesis, it states that there is a significant difference. Now, another classification states that blank is more effective than blank. So, let's say that the IV is more effective than the commercial brand. Meaning to say, in our example, the eagle fern is much effective than the commercial anti-disinfectant or the commercial brand. Okay? So, when the IV is greater than the commercial brand or is more effective than the commercial brand, this will be known as positive directional alternative hypothesis. Positive directional. Okay? So, a type of alternative hypothesis that states that blank is less, okay, effective. Less effective than blank, or the IV is less effective than the commercial brand. So the Eagle Fern is less effective than the commercial brand. Okay? We will call this negative. Okay? Directional. Alternative hypothesis. Okay? So these are the main classification of hypothesis. Okay? The research hypothesis, which provides the tentative solution to the existing problem. Statistical hypothesis, which provides null hypothesis, which states that there is no significant difference. Then we have alternative hypothesis, which can be subdivided into three. It states that there is a significant difference, which is non-directional. It states that the IV is more effective than the commercial brand, which is positive directional. Then it also states that IV is less effective than the commercial brand, which is negative directional. Okay, so with that said, okay, we can now formulate the research title, which we have done earlier. And as we formulate the research title, we are now ready to prepare a research design. Okay? So, after we hypothesized, we are now ready to prepare a research design. Preparing a research design. Okay? So, let's have preparing a research design. Okay. So, in preparing the research design, okay, how do we define research design once again? When we say research design, it is the plan of research. Okay, the plan of research. Meaning to say, this is how will you conduct a study. Okay? So, in preparing a research design for our example, so what is our example once again? Our example would be the application of research processes in this study, the utilization of Eagle Fern extract as an antibacterial agent against Salmonella typhi that causes typhoid fever. So, in preparing a research design for this one, we can say that this research is an experimental research, which is a type of research where SIP belongs. Okay? We try to let's say, we try to identify the effect of IV on a certain dependent variable. So, in preparing a research design in our example study, we will have the different types of setups. Because setups pertain to the treatments. And these treatments will make variation for our to our independent variable. Okay? So, there are different types of setups. We have experimental setups, and we have controlled setups. So, we have two. So, in experimental setups, these are the setups that is exposed to the independent variable. Meaning to say, experimental setups is where we manipulate the independent variable. Okay? While in the controlled setups, these are the setups that lacks the use of independent variable. Meaning to say, it is the usual thing that we use. Okay? Without the use of the independent variable. So, in controlled setups, we have two. We have two types. To subdivide into two. We have positive controlled setups, and we have negative controlled. So, in positive controlled, these are the setups that is proven to be effective. So, this is the commercial brand. Okay, this is the commercial brand that we are talking about. So let's say an effective commercial brand in killing Salmonella typhi, let's say, are the medicines. Okay, or let's say if the Salmonella typhi exists in the environment, we have the anti-disinfectants like Lysol, Glade. So these are the positive control. While in the negative controlled setups, these are the setups that lacks IV, lacks independent variable, and lacks commercial brand. So meaning to say, negative controlled setups, these are the setups that has no effect on the dependent variable. Okay? And in our study, so in our example, okay, or in conducting your SIP, there should have positive controlled and negative controlled. Okay? You don't have to choose. You must have both. Okay, you must have both positive controlled and negative controlled. Okay? So, what are the contents of the research design? So, contents of the research design. We have two. We have setups and we have trials. So, whenever we say trials, these are the repetitions. Okay, repetitions of what? Of the setups. Okay? So, why do we have repetitions? We have repetitions to ensure the validity and reliability. Okay? So, that is how we, let's say, that is how we define or we construct a plan to our research. Now, after we have identified our research design, we are now ready to gather data. Okay, we will now proceed to step number 5. And that step number 5 would be gathering data. Gathering data. So, in gathering data, this is where, okay, this is the process. Okay, where researches differ from one another. So, gathering data is a technique that makes researches unique on its own. Why? Because different types of researches have their own method of gathering data. Okay? So, for example, in qualitative research, we gather data through interviews and through the use of documents. And what are those documents? So, these documents can be diaries, i.e. meaning that is, okay? Diaries and portfolios. So, documents, that is, diaries and portfolios. While in quantitative, we gather data through interviews, we gather data through surveys or questionnaires, we gather data through experimentation, and we also gather data through observation. So, our example, okay? So, our example in our study, the utilization of eagle fern, we use gathering data according to quantitative. And that gathering of data must be experimentation. So, we experiment to gather data. We follow certain procedures in experimentation to gather data. So, let's say that how do we get or how do we create our product in our example? So, the experimentation involves the process of extracting. So, it involves the process of antibacterial assay, and so on and so forth. So, this will be the methods. And after we applied the methods, Okay, we have gathered the data. And this data must be subjected to what? It must be subjected to an organization and interpretation. So, after we have gathered data, it must be subjected to organization, analysis, okay, and interpretation. So, we are now down to the sixth step, which is organizing and interpreting data. Interpreting data. So, remember the steps 4 to 6 because now we will present to you how we organize. How do we present the research design? How do we gather data? How do we organize data? And how do we interpret data? Okay? So, let us have this one. Okay? So, this would be the table. Okay? Where we lay out our data. Okay? So, wait. Okay, let us have, or let us add another thing. Okay. So, we have this one, the table. Let's have. So, let us discuss. How do we organize, analyze, and interpret data? Okay. So, in laying out our data, we lay it out in a form of a table. Okay, in a form of a table. That is in our SIP because our example is the SIP, okay? So, we lay out our table. And there are parts of the table. So, number 1, the table number. So, number 2, we have the table title. Number 3, we have the rows. And number 4, we have the columns. Columns. Okay. So, the table number is this one. Okay, that is the table number. Then, the table title would be this one. So, notice how we write the table title. It is in an inverted pyramid format. Okay, so that is the table title. Next, we have the rows. So, this one signifies the rows. And we have the columns. And where do we find this table? Or where do we commonly use the table? We use the table in the chapter 4. Chapter 4 of our research paper. Okay, it can be found in chapter 4 of our research paper. Okay, so in organizing and interpreting data, we create tables, we create graphs, we create diagrams, okay, and we present data normally in tabular form. So that is how we organize data. Okay, so let us discuss this table. So in this table, we can see the research design. Okay, these are the setups that we are talking about earlier. So setups A, B, C, and D, these are the experimental setups because it is exposed to the independent variables. And what is our independent variables again? The eagle fern. So as we can see, it is exposed to the independent variable. Next, setup E is our positive control because it uses the commercial brand. Remember that when we are interpreting, or when we are organizing data rather, we do not put the name of the commercial brand. We simply put commercial brand, okay, to have anonymity. Okay, and lastly, we have setup F. Setup F is 100% water, and this water does not have any effect on the dependent variable, as we can see in the results, 0. Okay, so this would be our negative control. Now, in this table, we have the comparison of varied concentrations of eagle fern and the controlled setups in terms of zone of inhibition. So what when we say zone of inhibition, it is the area or the diameter that disappeared after applying the independent variable or after applying the treatment. So this table is actually the treatment table that we are talking about. Okay, and these are the data that were gathered. These numbers are the data that were gathered. So, let's analyze the table to interpret the data. So, in setups A, B, C, D, it is the experimental data or the experimental setups rather. So, A consists of 25% eagle fern, B 50% eagle fern, C 75% eagle fern, and D 100% eagle fern. So, meaning to say there is a variation of the independent variable. Okay? And as you can see, as the use or as the concentration of eagle fern increases, the zone of inhibition also increases. Meaning to say, the more you add or the more concentration of eagle fern, the more effective the product and the larger the zone of inhibition it creates. Meaning to say, the larger the zone of inhibition, so let's put it here, the larger the zone of inhibition, the more effective the product. Okay, the more effective. Okay, the larger the zone of inhibition, the more effective the product. Okay, so that would be our main interpretation or our main idea rather. Our interpretation is that as we add more concentration of eagle fern, okay, the zone of inhibition also increases. As the concentration of eagle fern increases, the zone of inhibition also increases, as we can see in our data. Now, can we say that eagle fern is more effective than the commercial brand? Okay, we can say that the eagle fern and the commercial brand can be equal. Can be equal in terms of its effectivity. Why? Because as we can see, okay, the validity of the results. So we have here 30.67 and we have here 30.0. Can we say that the results are valid? Yes, because the proven effective brand or the commercial brand, the positive control yielded 30.67. Now, it is valid and it is reliable because when we look at the numbers before the decimal point, it is very close to one another. It is exactly the same. We just have the uncertain digits here, but we can say that it is valid. So we can prove our hypothesis that the eagle fern is effective in killing Salmonella typhi. Now, how do we construct or how do we make a description out of this table? So we can say that table 1 shows the comparison of the varied concentrations of eagle fern and the control groups in terms of the zone of inhibition. So class, or so let's say that this table, this must describe, or this description must describe the table. So this will appear at the or below the table. So that is actually how it is put, like this one. So it is below the table. So it states that setups A, B, C, D, E, and F attain the average zone of inhibition of 15, 20, 25, 30, 30.7, and 0 respectively. So the interpretation in this study or in this table would be, so let us have our interpretation. So our interpretation would be, it was found out that the higher the concentration of eagle fern, the higher the zone of inhibition. So that would be our interpretation. And the higher the zone of inhibition, the higher or the lower the effectiveness. Obviously, the higher the effectiveness. Now, using this interpretation, we are now ready to proceed to the 7th step. And what is that 7th step? That 7th step is drawing conclusions. Drawing conclusions. Okay. So, how do we derive conclusions based on the interpretation? So, we interpreted that it was found out that the higher concentration of eagle fern, the higher the zone of inhibition. And we have the knowledge that the higher the zone of inhibition, the more effective the product. So, in conclusion, the conclusion would be, therefore, okay, eagle fern can kill Salmonella typhi. Okay? So that would be our conclusion. Also, remember that when you are drawing conclusions, when we are stating conclusions, it must be, so conclusions must be accompanied by what? By related literature and studies, by RRLS. So, meaning to say, after we concluded, therefore, eagle fern can kill Salmonella typhi, it must be followed by these findings are similar to the findings of, let's say you cited the person here, let's say Halliwell, the name of the author. Then you cite the date, 2018. Then blah 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 blah. You state how it is similar to the study. So that is how we draw conclusions. And after we draw conclusions, since research is a never-ending process of finding answers to questions, and since research has its own weaknesses, we must give recommendations. And where do these recommendations come from? These recommendations may come from the researcher themselves or may come from the professionals. So, let's give a recommendation. So, let's say that in our discussion, we tried to use the eagle fern leaves. So, we can recommend that try using other parts of eagle fern. Okay. Next, another recommendation would be try using other species of alkaloid rich plants, or try using other plants with alkaloids. And lastly, we can also recommend that try using other bacterial species as your experimental unit. Okay? So that is how we conduct, or that is how we give recommendations. So meaning to say, the key research concept here is that the research process is applicable in your SIP. The research process is applicable in conducting quantitative research. And quantitative research would be the main topic to be discussed in our next video presentations.